Okay, you guys ready? All right. So I guess we might as well start out by talking about the difference between Illustrator and Photoshop, since you both asked that question. So Photoshop is specifically for editing what are called raster images, and a raster image is just basically anything where it's sort of constructed of pixels, and each pixel contains information. And typically with photos, the information is bands of color in red, green, and blue. So you see RGB, that's a raster image. That's sort of as much detail as you need to know. But the basic gist is that in Photoshop you can very easily adjust sort of the quality of the image, the sharpness of it. You can change if it has a bad color cast because it was taken in yellow light. You can fix that. In Illustrator, you can't do any of those things. You can't adjust the photograph in any way, but you can bring photographs into Illustrator if you want to include them in your overall design, or if you want to trace them, which is something that I do very often. But the purpose of Illustrator is not for altering the photograph, it's for creating vector imagery, which is what you're looking at here, where everything is defined by either a line, like this, or a filled polygon like these. And those polygons are just, lines that close and define a space that can then be filled with color. And theoretically, vector images are infinitely scalable. So if all you have are vector lines and polygons, then you can bring this up to a massive size and there will be no noticeable change. There's no pixelation effect or resolution change that's going to happen, whereas, as you know, with a photograph or an image you pull from the internet, you try to resize that and it gets pixelated really fast. So as long as you're staying in a vector program like this, you can scale these things infinitely and they will not be affected. As soon as you export it to a raster format, like bitmap or something like that, then it will turn these color variations into pixels, and then you'll have to keep it at the scale that you exported it at. But we can talk about that again at the end. So what vector programs are really nice for is making really clean lines, really clean images, and making sure, so here in this example, I very specifically chose to leave white space on the outside of this guy's head, just for sort of cleanliness in the photo. But as you can see, I colored these people in, and that means that I needed to have perfectly closed polygons everywhere that I wanted to be able to add color. And so in vector editing formats, you can align lines perfectly to touch each other so that you know that they're intersecting, and you can define interior spaces that way. So I'm not going to show you anything about working with Photoshop, partly because we don't really have time and partly because I'm not very good at it. But there's tons of tutorials online, so if you're working with photos and you want to adjust them, check out online tutorials for that. I just wanted to show you some of the techniques that I used in creating this poster, which supposedly was successful enough to get you to sign up for STAR, so it's a decent image, I guess. And I can show you how some of those things were also useful in creating this, which I put together in about an hour after lunch today by tracing an image that I found on the internet that was really pixelated, and I wanted to have in a larger size that looked nice. Just a minute ago we were showing how to use gradients to create a 3D effect, so we can talk about that. And then this is another example of using vectors to create a colored image. Oh yeah, let's turn off the lights. Thank you, Will. You're making the GIMP do it. Perfect. Is that good for everyone? All right. All right, so we're just going to create a new document. You can immediately at this point define the shape of your document. So if you were making a poster for STAR, you would put in here, say you wanted it to be a portrait style poster, you would put in 20 inches wide and 30 inches tall. So we'll just go ahead and do that. And you can change whether it's landscape or portrait mode, and it will switch those for you. You can define if you want it to be in centimeters or pixels instead of inches, you can do that. And so now we have that, and I can turn on the rulers to verify that that's actually what size it is. and I don't actually know how to find that in the menu, but the hotkey for that is on a Mac, it's Command R. On a PC, it's Control R. And I'm going to try to teach you guys the hotkeys as we go along, because if you can get used to using hotkeys, it will make you work so much more efficiently. It is absolutely worth the investment of time to use a hotkey or to learn those. So I'll try to point them out as I use them. But if you're ever confused as to what tool I'm using because I hit the hotkey and you didn't know which one I hit, just shout. And this should be really an informal thing, so interrupt me at any time if you have questions. Okay, so here we have our what's called an artboard. This is the 20 by 30 square that we've created that we want our image to fall within. I'm going to use the zoom, which is a very simple hotkey of Z, to zoom in just for the heck of it. When I'm panning around like this, the hotkey for that is to hold down the space bar, and that will allow you to sort of turn on the panning hand only momentarily, and when you let the space bar go, you go back to the tool you were using. Again, this is how these hotkeys are going to make you so much more efficient versus if I were to go over here, choose the hand, move around, go back to my previous tool, etc.
Is there a good list of hotkeys that you like?
I could probably make one in a few minutes.
Or do you, so you just over time?
I've just learned them. You can find the hotkey for your tool by hovering over it.
Oh, okay.
So it's in parentheses there. So the hotkey for that tool is A, the hotkey for this one is V, etc. And you'll learn them pretty quickly, I think. Okay, so it's A. Yeah, Command A would be select all, just like it would be for most programs. And if you want to learn the hotkeys for functions like that, aside from tools, you can find them somewhere in the menus up here. There's like a keyboard shortcuts menu where you can actually define your own as well. So you can find them in there. But a lot of them, you know, Command S, Command A are the standards that you would find in any program. And so I wanted to start just by showing you how we just create a simple shape. So here are the shapes that Illustrator can create for you. I just found this drop-down menu by holding down when I clicked on that circle image. So I hold down and now I can see all of the options. So we'll start with a rectangle. The hotkey for this is M. I don't know why. And now I'm just going to click and drag, and I can create a rectangle of any size, and when I let go, it's going to create that for me. If I hold down Shift while I click and drag, it'll make it a square. So I'm just going to make a rectangle. The default coloration of this rectangle is always going to be shown right here, and that empty square, the empty square there, which is in black, is the stroke, and the stroke is the outline of any shape. And the fill is this filled square here, and that's the fill of any shape. And so I can change those colors here. The default is always going to be a white fill and a black outline, or it will be whatever coloration you used previously, which I'll show you in a second. So I'm going to give it a blue interior, and I'm going to give it a purple stroke. And I can make that more purple. I can make it pink if I change my mind. And if I want it to be a wider stroke, then I go into this menu here. And one thing I'll mention is that when you're actually working with Illustrator on a larger screen, or if you're working with different versions of Illustrators, some of these menus will be located in slightly different spaces. In this newer version of Illustrator, there are these little pop-outs on this small vertical menu here that I can move around. And I can pop that in and out. Oh boy. Sometimes they're all stacked up just in stacked menus like you see over here. So I'm going to change the weight of that to be much thicker, and so now you can see that pink line more obviously. If I made it even more thick, you can see, oops, I didn't have it selected so it didn't change anything. You can see that it's even thicker now. I can make it a dashed line, and I can define, the default is 12 points by 12 points, but I can define, okay, I want my dashes to be 2 points, points being basically pixels. And then I want the gaps between those dashes to be 10 points, and that's going to give me a really sort of diffuse dashed line, so you can play with things like that. So now I have this shape, and now I'm going to make the next shape. Let's make an ellipse. Again, click and drag. It'll be whatever shape I want. If I hold down Shift, it'll be a circle. So I'm just going to create that, and you can see that it's in the same color scheme as the last object that I created. There's, I believe if you hit D, which I just did, it'll go back to the default, which again is black and white. If I did that by accident, I can hit Command Z, just like most programs, to undo that last action. The nice thing about Illustrator, which is, I believe, different from Photoshop, is that you can hit Command Z basically as many times as you want, and it will keep stepping back through the things that you've done. And that can be really, really nice. In Photoshop, there is an option like that, but it is called Step Backward, and I think it's Command Shift Z, whereas here, Command Shift D is redo. So I'm going to redo all those things and get my circle back. Okay. So this arrow, this cursor that I keep going back to with the hotkey V, that's my selection tool, and it's the one you'll probably use the most often. If I select this box, you can see that it's showing me these little empty squares are showing me where the corners of that box are, and then also where the sides of the box are, so that I can change the shape of it. And again, if I hold down Shift, then it'll change it self-similarly. It's not going to turn it into a square now that it's already a rectangle, but it will keep the aspect ratio of that rectangle as I resize, versus if I don't hold down Shift, I can change it all around. I can also use this tool to click and drag any of the objects that I have around. And something that's different from Photoshop, or excuse me, from PowerPoint, which most of you are used to working in, is I can select things just by including them in my selection box if I click and drag with this tool. And you'll notice if you go back to PowerPoint that you have to select an entire object to get it to register that you've selected it. So this is both a good thing and a bad thing in Illustrator, as you can imagine, because maybe I have a whole bunch of little ellipses in here, and I only want to select the big one, but I also want to select that box. So now I'm like, oh, what do? There's a few ways to get around this. I can hold down Shift and drag over these guys, and it will deselect them. I can also reselect one if I deselected it by accident. So Shift works the same way as when you're selecting files in your Windows Explorer. The other thing you can do if you are going to be often working with these complicated systems and sort of aggregates of shapes is to create a layer. And so I've selected these 4 small polygons, and I'm going to drag them. I've created a layer, I've created a layer over here by clicking this new layer symbol. It looks like a page that's being flipped up. And now I'm going to select the things that I want to move into it, and you can see that this little blue box comes up over here. It's blue just because that's the color that was assigned to this layer. And I can click on that blue box and drag it into my other layer. And now you can see that the outline color of these has changed to red, so we know that they're in layer 2. I can change the color of layer 2. I can change the name of it, new layer name. And I can make it dark green if I want to. The only thing that the color of the layer means is just the color of the selection once you have those things. Now that it's in a new layer, I can visually turn them off without actually deleting them by hitting this eyeball tool, or I can lock them so that when I'm trying to select from this area, I can drag over those things and it does not register that I've tried to select them, right? Which can be really useful if you have these complicated graphics and you want to be able to lock certain elements and then move others around independently. One thing to be aware of with layers is that you can see these new, or these layer 2 polygons are sitting on top of those older polygons. I can change the order of these layers, and now they're sitting underneath, right? So the order of layers over here in this menu does matter, and it's a visual thing. The one on top here is the one that's on top in the file. So put that back. Okay. Another fun thing we can do now that we have all of these shapes, I'm going to unlock those, and I'm just going to turn this off for visual simplicity. So I wanted to make a cloud, which is something that I did in this poster. I made this thought bubble. I could have gone through, I'm just going to close some of these things. I could have gone through and with my pen tool created cloud shapes and drawn this by hand, and it's not looking so great, but that is sort of a thought bubble, right? And I could go through here and I could carefully make it look better, or I can take these elliptical shapes and make a bunch of them overlapping and then select those and use a tool that's found in the Pathfinder tool